Have you ever wondered if the world is truly a meritocracy? We're told that talent always rises to the top, but is that really true? What if the most incredible voice of our generation isn't on a stage, but on a cold street corner, singing for spare change? This is a story that challenges everything we think we know about worth, power, and destiny. And it begins with a belief most people find controversial, that sometimes the most valuable treasures are found in the most broken of places. It proves that when an orphan sang for coins, a billionaire producer didn't just hear her voice, he heard the future, and his offer left her speechless. On one side of our story, you have Rachel Coleman, a young orphan whose entire world is a daily struggle for survival. Her only solace is the secret voice she shares with the uncaring city for a handful of coins. On the other side, there's Gregory Woods, a legendary billionaire producer living in an opulent, empty mansion. He has everything money can buy, but he's creatively bankrupt and spiritually lost. They are two souls from different universes, one starving for a chance and the other starving for a reason. And then, one fateful afternoon, the sound of her heart-aching voice cuts through the armor of his limousine and changes everything forever. This isn't just a rag storage's fairy tale. It's a story about what happens when raw, untamed talent collides with unimaginable power. It's about a man who thought he could buy anything, discovering the one thing he truly needed couldn't be bought. And it's about a young woman who, after being humiliated by the world her entire life, is suddenly offered the keys to the kingdom. But the offer that leaves her speechless isn't what you think it is, and the journey they embark on is a complex love story filled with plot twists, redemption, and a powerful lesson about where true worth really comes from. Get ready for an emotional story that will touch your soul and make you question everything. We're about to dive deep into a world of music, ambition, and the surprising power of kindness. This is the story of how a voice from the gutter saved a king in a castle, and how overcoming poverty is about more than just money. Before we begin, help us see how far this story has traveled. Let us know in the comments what beautiful city or town you're watching from right now. We want to imagine the scenery with you. And if you believe in the power of destiny, don't forget to hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next, and please share this video with someone you think will be truly touched by this incredible journey. Now let's get into it. The biting wind didn't seem to care that it was whipping through the city streets, a concrete canyon that amplified its mournful howl. It was just another Tuesday, another day of survival. For Rachel Coleman, a young woman who the world had labeled an orphan, this meant finding a spot on the pavement, opening her worn guitar case for a few coins, and letting her voice cut through the noise. It wasn't just about the money, though God knows she needed it. It was the one thing that made her feel whole, a fragile shield against the world's indifference. She was just a girl, a nobody, singing her heart out to hurried footsteps. You know, it's funny how destiny plays its cards. Right there, parked just across the street in a limousine so black it seemed to swallow the light, sat Gregory Woods. This wasn't just any man, he was the billionaire producer, a kingmaker in an industry of manufactured dreams. He was supposed to be heading to a meeting, another soulless negotiation about percentages and marketability. But Head told his driver to stop. Head heard something, a sound so pure and raw it sliced through the tinted glass and the thick armor Head built around his heart. He couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. From his leather seat, a throne in a gilded cage, Gregory watched the girl. He saw the frayed edges of her coat, the way she shivered between verses, the almost desperate hope in her eyes as people passed by without a glance. It was a scene Head witnessed 1,000 times, a common sight in a city that chews people up and spits them out. Usually, he wouldn't have given it a second thought, but this voice, this wasn't just singing. It was a story, a prayer, an emotional gut punch that he hadn't felt in decades. It was a secret voice the world had completely overlooked. He leaned forward, his polished world of charts and stars momentarily forgotten, completely captivated. Every note she sang was a testament to a life of struggle, a powerful ballad of overcoming poverty before it had even been overcome. The melody was haunting, filled with a sorrow so profound yet so beautiful it felt like a contradiction. This wasn't the polished, auto-tuned perfection he dealt with every day. This was something real, something that bled. The kind of authenticity you just can't manufacture, no matter how much money you throw at it. The song was a heart-aching plea, a narrative of pain and resilience that resonated deep within the producer's soul. He, a man who could buy anything, was receiving a gift more valuable than his entire empire, and it was being offered for loose change on a street corner. The irony was almost too much to bear. Who was this girl? This orphan with the voice of a fallen angel? He felt a forgotten spark ignite within him, a sudden, desperate need to know more about the source of that incredible, heartbreaking sound. As her final note faded into the city's unforgiving hum, Gregory didn't move. He just sat there, mesmerized, a strange conflict brewing inside him. Part of him was the cynical billionaire, skeptical and wary of a world full of people wanting something. But another, deeper part, the artist he once was, recognized the sound of pure, unadulterated talent. He knew, with a certainty that rattled him to his core, that he couldn't just drive away. He had to do something. But what does a man who lives in the sky do when he discovers a diamond in the gutter? Rachel Coleman's world was painted in shades of gray and blue. It was the color of cracked pavement, of a sky threatening rain, and of the cold that seemed to live permanently in her small rented room. Every day was a battle, a constant exercise in overcoming poverty that left little room for dreams. Her life was a ledger of things she lacked: a family, a warm meal, a future. The title of orphan wasn't just a label, it was a constant, heavy companion. Yet, in the middle of this bleak existence, there was one vibrant, defiant splash of color: her music. It was her only inheritance, her solace, her escape. For Rachel, a melody wasn't just a collection of notes, it was food for a starving soul. When she sang, the damp chill of her room faded away, replaced by a warmth that no furnace could provide. Her guitar, with its scarred wood and aging strings, was her most faithful friend, listening without judgment and answering with harmony. This was her true home, a sanctuary built of sound where she wasn't a charity case or an inconvenience. She was a creator, a storyteller. This secret voice was the one part of her that the world's harshness couldn't tarnish or take away. Meanwhile, miles away, Gregory Woods lived in a world of blinding golden light. His mansion was a monument to success, a palace with sprawling gardens and rooms so large they seemed to echo with emptiness. He was the quintessential billionaire, a man who had conquered the music industry and could have anything he desired with a simple phone call. He was surrounded by opulence, by priceless art and gleaming awards that served as monuments to a past glory. But if you looked closely, you'd see the fine layer of dust on his grand piano, untouched for years. The truth is, Gregory's life had become a gilded prison. He was creatively bankrupt, a producer who no longer produced anything of meaning. His days were a monotonous parade of business deals and empty flattery from artists who were more brand than talent. The fire that had once driven him to discover true genius had dwindled to a cold ember. He was profoundly lonely, the silence of his massive home a deafening roar that reminded him of his own hollowness. His was a deeply emotional poverty of the spirit, a starvation that no amount of money could ever hope to cure. It's a strange paradox, isn't it? The orphan girl, with nothing to her name, possessed a treasure that filled her entire being, a wellspring of passion that never ran dry. The billionaire, who owned everything, was utterly empty, searching for a single drop of the authenticity that she had in abundance. They were two souls at opposite ends of the universe, each starving for what the other had. One craved the safety and comfort money could buy, while the other desperately needed a reason to feel something, anything, real again. And so, as Gregory sat in his car replaying the sound of her voice in his mind, he was confronted with a truth he couldn't ignore. Her music was a mirror, reflecting his own desolate state back at him with painful clarity. That heart-aching melody from the street corner wasn't just a song, it was a lifeline thrown into the abyss of his existence. But the chasm between his world and hers was immense, almost impassable. Could a man who had forgotten how to feel truly recognize the value of a heart that felt everything? Back in the sterile, climate-controlled quiet of the limousine, the spell was broken by the pragmatic voice of Gregory's assistant, Mark. "Should I have security move her along, sir?" he asked, his tone dripping with a bored efficiency. To Mark, Rachel Coleman was just another piece of the city's unfortunate scenery, a bit of grit on the otherwise polished lens through which he viewed the world. These performers are a dime a dozen. Probably just another sob story looking for a handout. He couldn't have sounded more dismissive if he'd tried. It was a casual, thoughtless moment of being humiliated without even knowing it. A part of Gregory, the cynical billionaire part that had been his default setting for years, agreed with him. Had built his empire on finding manufactured perfection, on artists who had been groomed, packaged, and polished for public consumption. True genius, had long since come to believe, was a product of investment, of expensive lessons and industry. Connections, not something you just stumbled upon on a dirty sidewalk. How could a voice like that, a secret voice with such depth and power, possibly come from a place of such abject overcoming poverty? It just didn't compute. His mind was a battlefield of warring thoughts. The producer in him, the shrewd businessman, saw 1,000 liabilities. She was an orphan, uneducated, with no training, no image, and no concept of the brutal machinery of the music industry. She was a risk, an unknown variable in a formula he had perfected over decades. Investing in her would be a fool's errand, a charity case that would likely end in failure and embarrassment. It went against every instinct that had made him a titan of the industry. He had a reputation to protect after all. Yet, he couldn't shake the sound of her voice. It was a hook, a melody that had burrowed deep into his soul and refused to let go. It was a haunting, emotional refrain that played over and over in his mind, mocking his logic and his skepticism. He had listened to thousands of singers, to the most technically perfect vocalists in the world, but none of them had made him feel what he'd felt in those few minutes. It was a raw, untamed power that the sterile environment of his recording studios had been missing for a very long time. "No," Gregory said finally, his voice sharp enough to make Mark flinch. "Don't move her along. Just wait." The skepticism was still there, a bitter taste in his mouth, but it was now competing with a feeling he hadn't experienced in years: curiosity. It was a dangerous, thrilling sensation, the kind that had led to his greatest successes and his most spectacular failures. He was a gambler at heart, and he had just heard the sound of a wild card being played by destiny itself. He looked back at Rachel, who was now packing up her meager earnings, a few lonely coins rattling in her case. A plan began to form in his mind, a strange and unconventional idea. It was a test, not just for her, but for himself. He needed to know if that heart-aching sound was a fluke, a trick of the cold air and his own melancholy. He needed to get a closer look, but not as Gregory Woods, the billionaire producer. He needed a different angle, a way to see her raw and unpolished, without the corrupting influence of his own name. The next day, a black car, far less ostentatious than Gregory's limousine, pulled up beside the spot where Rachel usually played. Mark stepped out, his tailored suit looking comically out of place against the gritty backdrop of the street. He approached Rachel with the rehearsed air of someone performing an unpleasant task. He didn't offer a contract or praise her voice. Instead, he delivered a surprise offer so unexpected it left Rachel momentarily confused. "There's a cleaning position open at a recording studio downtown," he said, his voice flat. "The pay is steady. Better than this." Rachel Coleman looked from the man's polished shoes to his impersonal face, her mind racing. A job? A real steady job with a roof over her head while she worked? It felt like a miracle, a lifeline she never would have dared to pray for. Of course, she had no idea this was Zenith Studios, the legendary creative home of Gregory Woods, the very billionaire shed seen in magazines. She didn't know that this offer wasn't an act of charity, but the first move in a clandestine game of observation. For her, it was simply a chance, a way out of the cold. Gregory had orchestrated the entire thing from his penthouse office, feeling a strange mix of guilt and strategic excitement. It was a duplicitous plan, born of his deep-seated skepticism. He told himself it was a necessary evil, a way to see the real person behind the secret voice without the pressure of an audition. He wanted to know if her character possessed the same beauty as her music. Did she have resilience? A work ethic? Was she a person of substance, or just a fleeting sound he had romanticized? He had to see her in the wild, so to speak. This was his perfect laboratory. By placing her in the studio as a cleaner, he could observe her from a distance through the unblinking eyes of his security cameras. He could see how she reacted to the pressure cooker environment of his world, how she carried herself around the pampered and often cruel artists who walked his halls. It was a calculated, almost cold-hearted experiment designed by a master producer. He wanted to see if the orphan girl had the grit to survive before he even considered investing in her gift. Destiny had brought her to his attention, but he would determine her future. Rachel, oblivious to the high-stakes audition she was about to unknowingly enter, accepted the offer with a gratitude so sincere it gave even the cynical Mark a moment's pause. For her, cleaning floors in a place where music was made felt like getting one step closer to heaven. It was a chance at overcoming poverty, a small but significant victory in a life full of defeats. The thought of being surrounded by the creation of music, even as a silent observer from the sidelines, was an emotional thrill beyond her wildest dreams. And so the stage was set. Rachel prepared for her first day of work, filled with a nervous hope she hadn't felt in years. Gregory, meanwhile, settled into his role as the unseen puppet master, watching his monitors like a hawk. He was looking for proof, for a sign that his instincts hadn't completely failed him. He was about to get a front row seat to the daily life of Rachel Coleman, a performance far more telling than any formal audition could ever be. He just hoped he hadn't made a terrible mistake. Zenith Studios was another universe entirely. It was a sleek, modern labyrinth of glass and steel, where the air hummed with a nervous, creative energy. For Rachel, stepping inside was like entering a dream. But the dream quickly showed its sharper edges. The artists who roamed its halls were like exotic birds, preened and polished, dripping with designer labels and an air of untouchable importance. They looked right through Rachel, the invisible girl with the mop and bucket. Or if they did notice her, it was with a sneer of disdain. One afternoon, a chart-hopping pop star named Sabrina, known for her devout behavior, deliberately bumped into Rachel, spilling her expensive latte. "Watch where you're going, cleaner," she snapped, not with anger, but with a bored cruelty meant to establish her place in the hierarchy. Her entourage snickered. Rachel, who had been humiliated by life in far more profound ways, simply met her gaze with clear, steady eyes. She didn't cower or apologize profusely. Instead, a quiet strength seemed to radiate from her, a stark contrast to the singer's manufactured bravado. With a simple, "I'm sorry you spilled your drink. Let me get that for you," Rachel knelt and began cleaning the mess, her movements calm and deliberate. There was no anger, no resentment, just a quiet dignity that was more powerful than any retort. This simple act of kindness in the face of mockery was a language the studio's inhabitants didn't seem to understand. They were used to fights, to drama, to ego. They weren't prepared for grace. It was a small moment, but in the grand theater of the studio, it was a profound one. Up in his office, Gregory Woods watched the entire exchange on his security monitor, his fingers steepled under his chin. He had expected her to be intimidated, to perhaps even break down in the face of such casual cruelty. Instead, he saw a resilience that fascinated him. The young orphan had plucked from the street, possessed a strength of character that many of his so-called superstars severely lacked. She wasn't fighting back with fire, but with a gentle calm that seemed to extinguish the negativity around her. This became a recurring theme. Day after day, Rachel endured the small slights and dismissive attitudes of the studio's elite. Her simple, worn clothes were a constant source of amusement for some, her quiet nature mistaken for weakness. But she never once let their judgment pierce her armor. She did her job diligently, always with a soft smile and a kind word for the sound engineers and assistants, the other invisible people who kept the great machine running. She was building a reputation, not as an artist, but as a genuinely good person. Gregory found himself increasingly captivated, not by her secret voice, which he hadn't heard again, but by her unwavering character. It was a heart-aching display of fortitude. He was beginning to realize that her beautiful voice wasn't a fluke, it was an extension of who she was. It was born from this deep well of kindness and resilience. The producer in him was intrigued, but the man in him was deeply moved. The test was yielding results he hadn't anticipated, revealing a purity he thought no longer existed in his world. The security cameras in Zenith Studios became Gregory's private window into Rachel's soul. He would spend hours watching the silent, black and white feeds, an obsession he couldn't quite explain to himself. He watched her meticulously cleaning the soundboards, her movements gentle and respectful, as if she were tending to sacred artifacts. He watched her sharing her meager lunch with a stray cat in the alleyway. These small acts of kindness were painting a picture of a woman whose inner world was as rich as his was barren. Then he noticed something else. As she worked, lost in the repetitive motions of polishing glass or mopping floors, she would often hum. There was no audio on the security feeds, but he could see her head swaying, her lips softly forming notes. He couldn't hear the sound, but he could imagine it. He instructed his head of security, a man of absolute discretion, to activate the ambient microphones in Studio C, the main recording space, whenever Rachel was cleaning it alone at night. What he heard next would change everything. It wasn't just humming. It was a torrent of original melodies, flowing out of her as naturally as breath. They were complex, emotional, and hauntingly beautiful. The melodies were intricate, filled with unexpected turns and a raw, poignant beauty that made the hair on his arms stand up. The producer in him was floored. These weren't just tunes, they were fully formed musical ideas, fragments of genius that she seemed to create without any effort at all. They were a part of her secret voice, the creative engine behind the sound he'd heard on the street. He sat in his darkened office, listening to the feed, and felt a profound sense of shame and excitement. The multi-million-dollar songs his professional artists were agonizing over in the recording booths paled in comparison to the effortless beauty of what this orphan girl was humming to herself while she polished a microphone stand. She had more talent in her quiet moments of solitude than his roster of stars had in their entire entourage of songwriters and producers. It was a stunning, heart-aching revelation. This was the ultimate plot twist in his little experiment. He had brought her in to test her character, to see if she could withstand the pressures of his world. He had been so focused on her resilience and her kindness that he had almost forgotten about the incredible gift that had drawn him to her. In the first place, now he understood. The voice and the person were one and the same. Her music was so pure because she was pure. It was an authenticity that his world of smoke and mirrors had all but extinguished. Gregory now knew he was sitting on a treasure of immeasurable value. This wasn't just a singer, she was a songwriter, a true artist in every sense of the word. The billionaire had found his diamond, and it was shining brighter than he could have ever imagined. But this discovery brought with it a new, heavier burden. How could he possibly bring this delicate, brilliant flame into the harsh, commercial winds of the industry without it being instantly snuffed out? He had to find the perfect moment, the perfect opportunity to reveal her gift to the world. The day started with a storm, and its name was Sabrina. The pop star was in Studio C, trying to record a vocal for her next big single, but things were not going well. She was off-key, distracted, and her frustration was rapidly boiling over into fury. After yet another failed take, she let out a piercing shriek through her expensive headphones against the soundproof glass and unleashed a torrent of abuse at the sound engineer. "I can't work like this. This is amateur hour," she screamed before storming out of the studio, her entourage scrambling behind her like frightened mice. The atmosphere she left behind was thick with tension and recrimination. The production team, a group of seasoned professionals, looked exhausted and demoralized. The air was sour, all the creative energy sucked out of the room and replaced with a heavy, awkward silence. It was in moments like these that the glamour of the music industry peeled back to reveal the ugly, ego-driven machinery beneath. The project was behind schedule, the producer was losing money, and the star was imploding. It was a disaster. Into this tense vacuum stepped Rachel Coleman, armed with her cleaning cart. She was scheduled to clean the studio between sessions, completely unaware of the drama that had just unfolded. She could feel the negativity in the air. It was a palpable thing. The engineers were slumped in their chairs, heads in their hands. Without a word, she began her work, her presence a quiet, unassuming counterpoint to the chaos that had just transpired. She started by gently wiping down the mixing board, her movements slow and calming. Then, perhaps to soothe her own nerves, or maybe as an unconscious act of kindness for the frayed souls in the room, she began to sing. It wasn't a performance, it was barely more than a whisper. She chose a simple, old folk melody, a song of hope and resilience that her mother used to sing to her. Her secret voice, which had only been heard by the city's indifferent pedestrians and Gregory's hidden microphones, now filled the tense silence of the multi-million-dollar studio. It was a soft, gentle rain after a raging fire. The song was a balm. It was pure, emotional, and completely devoid of the ego and artifice that had just poisoned the room. It was a heartaching sound that seemed to physically cleanse the atmosphere, washing away the anger and frustration. One by one, the engineers and assistants lifted their heads. They looked at each other, then at the cleaning girl, their expressions a mixture of confusion and awe. They had never heard anything like it. It was a voice that didn't demand attention, but effortlessly commanded it. Rachel, lost in the melody, was still unaware of the effect she was having. She was simply cleaning and singing, finding her own peace in the familiar ritual. She didn't know that she was in the process of changing her own destiny. She didn't realize that her quiet, impromptu performance was about to cause a seismic shift in the foundations of Zenith Studios. The storm had passed, and in its wake, something beautiful and entirely unexpected was beginning to bloom. The first to be snared by the sound was the young intern, who stopped sorting cables mid-task. Then the head engineer, a grizzled veteran, who thought had heard it all, slowly took off his own headphones, his jaw slack. Soon, every single person in the control room was frozen, their gazes fixed on the unassuming girl with the dust cloth. The entire production team, moments before simmering in a stew of stress and anger, was now held in a state of suspended animation, united by a shared sense of wonder. They were utterly captivated. The silence that fell was absolute. It was a sacred, reverent quiet, the kind usually reserved for cathedrals or concert halls in the final, fading moments of a masterpiece. Rachel's voice, raw and unfiltered by any studio technology, filled every corner of the room. It was a sound so pure and powerful that it seemed impossible it could be coming from the quiet, Cleaning girl they had all overlooked for weeks. It was the secret voice of an angel hiding in plain sight, and they were all struck completely speechless. Upstairs, in his panoramic office, Gregory Woods watched the scene unfold on his main monitor. The audio piped directly into his high-end speakers. His knuckles were white as he gripped the arms of his leather chair. He had heard her sing through hidden microphones before, but this was different. This was witnessing her power in real time, seeing its effect on a room full of jaded industry professionals. He felt a tremor of excitement, a thrill he hadn't experienced since he was a young, hungry producer just starting out. This was it. This was the moment of truth. The song was a powerful narrative of overcoming poverty of the spirit, a melody that spoke of finding light in the deepest darkness. It was an emotional journey in just a few verses, and it held everyone in its gentle, unbreakable grip. The team wasn't just listening to a song, they were experiencing a story, told by a voice that was so honest it was almost painful. For a few brief, magical minutes, the orphan girl made everyone in that room forget their titles, their deadlines, and their frustrations. She made them remember why they fell in love with music in the first place. When her soft final note hung in the air and then gently faded away, the silence that followed was even more profound than before. It was thick with unspoken emotion. No one dared to breathe, as if exhaling would shatter the fragile, beautiful spell she had woven. Rachel herself seemed to finally notice the stillness, the dozens of eyes fixed on her. A faint blush rose to her cheeks as she realized she had been singing aloud, a shy, embarrassed smile touching her lips. She thought she had broken some rule, but Gregory knew what that silence meant. It was the sound of discovery. It was the sound of a paradigm shifting. The billionaire, the kingmaker, leaned back in his chair, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face for the first time in years. He had his proof. He had his star. Now, all that was left was to convince her, and the rest of the world, of the incredible destiny that awaited her. The game was about to change, and it was all because a girl decided to sing while she worked. Watching the stunned faces of his crew and hearing the lingering echo of Rachel's voice, Gregory felt something shift deep inside him. It was a feeling he dimly recognized, a ghost from his past he thought was long dead inspiration. A creative spark, hot and bright, suddenly ignited in the cold, dormant chambers of his soul. For years, had been going through the motions, a producer by title but not by passion. Had been chasing trends, manufacturing hits, and growing richer and emptier with every platinum record. He finally understood what had been missing. It wasn't a new sound, a new technology, or a new marketing gimmick. It was authenticity. It was truth. The multi-million-dollar artists he managed were products, carefully constructed illusions wrapped in a brand. Their emotional depth was focus grouped. Their pain was written by a committee of songwriters. He had been so busy building stars that he had forgotten how to find them. He had been searching for fire in factories that only produced smoke and mirrors. But Rachel, she was the real thing. The authenticity had been desperately, unconsciously searching for wasn't in a polished headshot or a curated social media feed. It was in the heart of the orphan girl who sang to soothe a tense room. Her music wasn't a product, it was a piece of her soul, offered up with a quiet kindness and humility that was utterly foreign in his world. She was the secret voice not just of a new artist, but of a forgotten ideal in music. The billionaire suddenly felt like an explorer who, after a lifetime of searching for lost cities of gold, realizes the real treasure was the simple, pure spring water head discovered at the start of his journey. All his wealth, all his power, all his influence, all felt secondary to the monumental discovery he had just made. He felt a powerful, overwhelming urge to create again, to get his hands dirty, to build something real and lasting from the ground up. He wanted to protect that purity, to amplify it, to show the world its power. This realization brought with it a profound sense of redemption. It was a redemption for his own cynicism, for the years he had wasted chasing hollow victories. Rachel Coleman's voice was not just her gift, it was a gift to him. It was a chance to remember the man he had been before the empire, the young music lover who believed a single song could change the world. This wasn't about making another hit, it was about honoring a talent so pure it felt sacred. A new sense of purpose solidified within him. His mission was no longer just to observe Rachel. It was to champion her. He knew the path forward would be fraught with challenges. The industry was designed to corrupt the very authenticity she embodied. It would try to change her, to package her, to sand down her beautiful rough edges. He now saw his role clearly. He would not be her boss, he would be her shield. But first, he needed to know if she had the strength to wield her own sword. Destiny, it seems, has a flair for dramatic timing. The very next day, a venomous snake walked into Gregory's paradise. His name was Marcus Thorne, a rival producer known for his predatory tactics and utter lack of scruples. Marcus was visiting, under the guise of a friendly chat, but his real purpose was to gloat about his latest chartpaper and probe for weaknesses in Gregory's empire. He strutted through the halls of Zenith Studios with the oily confidence of a man who enjoyed kicking things to see if they'd break. He found his target in the main lounge. Rachel was quietly polishing a glass table, her mind a world away, perhaps crafting a new melody. Marcus, seeing her simple clothes and menial task, saw an opportunity for a power play in front of Gregory's staff. Well, Gregory," he said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I see the great Gregory Woods is so desperate for talent, he started a work release program. What's her story? Did you find her singing for spare change?" The question was a dagger, wrapped in a smug grin. Rachel froze, the cloth still in her hand. The handful of artists and assistants in the room fell silent, their eyes darting between Marcus, Rachel, and the doorway where Gregory had just appeared. He stood there, his face an unreadable mask of calm. This was it, the ultimate test. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to step in, to annihilate Marcus with a few choice words and protect Rachel from this cruel, public attack. But he held himself back, his jaw tight. He needed to see her strength. He needed to know if she could stand on her own. Marcus circled Rachel like a shark. "Don't be shy," he sneered. "Tell us all. Are you his new pet project? A little charity case too. Make him feel good about himself?" He was intentionally trying to provoke a reaction, to make her cry or run away. He wanted to show everyone that Gregory was losing his touch, picking up strays. Rachel was being publicly humiliated, dissected by a cruel man for sport, and her potential protector was standing by, saying nothing. The silence from the great billionaire was deafening, and to everyone else in the room, deeply confusing. For Rachel, the world seemed to shrink to the space between her and Marcus. The sting of his words was sharp, a familiar pain she had felt her entire life. She was the orphan, the nobody, the girl who was always on the outside looking in. For a moment, her composure threatened to crack. She could feel the hot rush of tears welling behind her eyes. It would have been so easy to break, to crumble under the weight of his contempt and the perceived betrayal of Gregory's silence. But then, something inside her solidified. It was the same quiet strength that had carried her through 1,000 other lonely nights and cruel days. She had faced far worse than a bully in a fancy suit. She had faced starvation, loneliness, and the soul-crushing indifference of the world, and she had survived. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and took a slow, steadying breath. What happened next would not be a plot twist for her, but for every single person who was watching and waiting for her to fall apart. Instead of tears, Rachel Coleman's eyes held a calm, clear fire. She looked directly at Marcus Thorne, not with anger, but with a kind of profound, unnerving pity. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. When she finally spoke, her words were simple, yet they landed with the force of a tidal wave in the silent room. "My name is Rachel," she said. Her voice steady and clear, "and you're right. I don't have money and I don't have a fancy title. But I don't think that's how you measure a person's worth." Marcus was taken aback, his smug expression faltering for the first time. He had expected a dramatic, emotional outburst, which he could have easily mocked. He was not prepared for this. Quiet, unshakable dignity. Rachel continued, her voice filled with a conviction that came from a life of overcoming poverty and finding value in places money couldn't touch. "My worth comes from the work I do, from trying to be a good person, and from the music I carry inside me. None of those things can be bought or sold, sir." The air in the room shifted. It was a stunning moment of redemption, not for Rachel, but for the very idea of character over currency. She hadn't just defended herself, she had articulated a powerful truth that resonated with everyone who had ever felt small or overlooked. Her simple words were a masterclass in grace under fire. The way she refused to be humiliated, responding to cruelty not with anger, but with a gentle assertion of her own value, was a heartbreaking display of immense inner strength. From the doorway, Gregory Woods felt a surge of pride so intense it almost buckled his knees. He had never been more impressed by anyone in his entire life. This was the strength he had been looking for. This was the unbreakable core he knew was necessary to survive the vipers of the industry. Rachel wasn't just a voice, she was a warrior. A warrior who fought with kindness and truth as her only weapons. He had wanted to see if she could stand on her own, and she had just proven she could stand taller than anyone else in the room. Marcus Thorne, for the first time in his professional life, was left completely speechless. He had no comeback. Any further insults would only make him look even smaller and more pathetic. He sputtered for a moment, then, with a dismissive wave of his hand, he turned and stormed away, his attempted power play having backfired spectacularly. He had tried to expose a weakness in Gregory's camp and had instead revealed a fortress. The entire room seemed to exhale at once, the tension broken. Rachel simply went back to her work, as if nothing had happened, her quiet dignity intact. But everything had changed. Gregory finally pushed himself off the doorframe and began to walk towards her. The test was over. The observation was complete. He was no longer a skeptical billionaire or a clandestine producer watching from the shadows. The time for games was over. It was time to finally meet the artist he now knew, without a single shred of doubt, was destined for greatness. Gregory walked across the polished floor, the sound of his expensive shoes the only thing breaking the silence. He stopped in front of Rachel, who looked up from her cleaning, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. He didn't look at her like a billionaire, addressing an employee. He looked at her with a raw, undisguised admiration, the look of one artist recognizing another. "Rachel," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it, "I apologize for him, and I apologize for my silence. What you just did was extraordinary." He ignored the stunned looks from his staff who were still lingering in the room. His focus was entirely on her. "I've been a fool, Rachel Coleman," he confessed, the words feeling both difficult and liberating. "I've been listening with my ears, but I haven't been listening with my heart." He gestured towards the empty, cavernous space of Studio C. "I know you clean in there every day. But that room isn't for cleaning, it's for creating. It's for a voice like yours." This was a surprise offer of a different kind, an offer of recognition. He led her into the legendary studio, the place where countless gold records had been born. He walked her to the center of the room, to the single iconic microphone standing in the middle of the floor. "Forget the cleaning cart," he said gently. "Forget Marcus Thorne, forget me as your boss. Forget everything. Just be the girl I heard on the street. The girl I've heard in these halls when you thought no one was listening." "Please," he implored, his voice thick with an emotional weight, "would you sing for me?" Rachel stood before the microphone, her heart pounding in her chest. This was the moment every musician dreams of, a moment she never, ever thought would be hers. This was her destiny calling. She looked at Gregory, the powerful producer, and saw not a king, but a man who looked hungry for something true. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and let the music she carried inside her finally, truly break free. She didn't sing a cover. She sang one of her own melodies, a song about being an orphan who finds a home in her own voice. The first note that left her lips was a revelation. Unfiltered, raw, and perfect. Her secret voice filled the studio, wrapping around Gregory and holding him captive. It was a heart-aching torrent of pain, hope, and breathtaking beauty. The song told her entire life story, a ballad of overcoming poverty and finding light in the darkest of corners. She poured every bit of her struggle, her kindness, her quiet dignity into the performance. She wasn't just singing notes, she was baring her soul for the first time. When she finished, the silence that returned was the most profound yet. Gregory Woods, the man of a million words, the billionaire who could talk his way into any deal and out of any trouble, was utterly and completely speechless. Tears were openly streaming down his face, something his staff had never seen. He couldn't speak, he couldn't move. He could only stand there, humbled and broken, and remade by the sheer, undeniable power of her gift. He had found his truth. After what felt like an eternity, Gregory finally found his voice, though it was raspy with emotion. He walked over to a desk, pulled out a thick document, and placed it in front of her. It was a recording contract, the kind of life-changing document that artists would kill for. It offered a multi-album deal, a massive signing bonus, and the full weight of his legendary production skills. This was the ultimate surprise offer, the kind of stimulating moment that only happens in fairy tales. "This is yours," he said simply. "Everything. Will make you the biggest star in the world." The billionaire producer expected tears of joy, ecstatic screams, immediate acceptance. He was prepared for an overwhelming emotional reaction. Instead, he was met with a quiet, hesitant silence. Rachel looked at the contract, at the dense paragraphs and the staggering numbers, and she didn't see a dream come true. She saw a cage. She saw the face of Sabrina, the sneer of Marcus Thorne, the casual cruelty of the world she had just been given a glimpse of. A profound fear gripped her heart. I don't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Gregory was stunned. He couldn't comprehend her hesitation. "Don't know? Rachel, this is everything," he exclaimed, the businessman in him re-emerging for a moment. But then he saw the look in her eyes. It wasn't greed or ambition, it was fear. A deep, soulful fear of losing the only thing she truly owned. Her music was her sanctuary, her friend, her solace. It was pure and untainted. She tried to explain, her words tumbling out in a soft, heart-aching confession. "My music. It's the only thing that's ever been truly mine," she said, looking at him with pleading eyes. "It's what kept me warm when I was cold and what fed me when I was hungry. It's my joy. This world you live in," she gestured around the sterile studio, "it feels so cruel. What if it takes my joy away? What if it makes my music just another product to be sold? If I lose that, I lose everything. I'd rather be a poor orphan with my songs than a rich star without them." Gregory listened, and for the first time, he truly understood the depth of what he was dealing with. This wasn't a transaction, it was a sacred trust. Her hesitation wasn't an insult, it was a testament to the purity of her gift. He had been so focused on what he could give Harmony, fame, success, that he hadn't considered what he might be taking away. He was asking her to risk her very soul, and he had to prove to her that it would be safe in his hands. This was a turning point, a plot twist in his own understanding of his role. He felt a wave of redemption for his own past actions, for the countless artists he had pushed and molded without a thought for their inner worlds. Rachel was different. She deserved better. He looked at her, this incredible woman who had been humiliated and yet stood with such strength, and he knew he had to change his approach entirely. This wouldn't be a standard artist-producer relationship. He had to become more than her mentor. He had to become her guardian. He had to earn her trust, not buy it with a contract. Throwing the contract aside, Gregory made a decision that would redefine their relationship. "You're right," he said, his voice resonating with newfound sincerity. "Let's forget the contract. Let's just make music. You and me. No deadlines, no executives, no pressure. Let's just go into the studio and play." This wasn't a business proposition from a billionaire producer anymore. It was an invitation from one artist to another, a promise to protect her gift. This gentle approach was the most surprise offer of all. And so their journey truly began. Gregory cleared his schedule, pushing aside multi-million-dollar projects to focus solely on Rachel. He didn't put her in front of a microphone and demand a hit. Instead, he sat with her at the grand piano, an instrument that had been silent for years, and asked her to share her melodies. He listened, truly listened, with a reverence and respect she had never known. He didn't try to change her sound, he helped her find the best way to express it, nurturing her raw talent with a gentle, supportive hand. He showed her a side of himself that no one in the industry had ever seen. The cutthroat tycoon was gone, replaced by a patient and encouraging mentor. He shared stories of his own early struggles, of his love for music before it became a business. He was vulnerable, human, and his kindness was the key that began to unlock Rachel's fears. She saw that he wasn't trying to corrupt her joy, he was trying to share in it. Slowly, cautiously, her hesitation began to melt away, replaced by a blossoming trust. This process was transformative for Gregory as well. As he mentored Rachel, he felt his own deep-seated cynicism begin to dissolve. Her passion was infectious, her emotional honesty a refreshing antidote to the jaded world he inhabited. He found himself rediscovering his own love for the craft, feeling that creative spark roar back to life. Working with Rachel wasn't a job, it was a redemption. She was saving him just as much as he was guiding her, a heartaching symbiosis that neither of them had expected. Their days in the studio became a sacred ritual. It was a space filled with music, laughter, and a growing, unspoken bond. He taught her about arrangement and harmony. She taught him about resilience and the beauty of imperfection. The orphan who had been invisible her whole life finally felt seen, and the billionaire who had everything finally felt like he had something that mattered. It was the beginning of a beautiful partnership, one built not on contracts and commerce, but on mutual respect and a shared love for the truth that music could tell. The change in both of them was palpable. Rachel began to carry herself with a new confidence, her secret voice growing stronger and more daring with each passing day. Gregory's staff saw a man they didn't recognize, one who smiled freely and seemed decades younger. A powerful connection was being forged in the quiet hours of the recording studio, a harmony that was far more complex and beautiful than any song they could ever record. It was the first tentative chapter of an unexpected love story. The late nights in the studio bled into one another, creating a world that belonged only to them. The music they were creating was magnificent, a heartaching tapestry woven from her raw talent and his expert guidance. But something else was happening in the quiet spaces between the notes. It was in the shared glance across the mixing board, the lingering touch of his hand on hers as he pointed out a chord progression, the easy laughter that filled the silence. A deep and undeniable emotional bond was forming, one that transcended music. Gregory found himself mesmerized by the small things. He loved the way Rachel would scrunch up her nose when she was concentrating on a difficult lyric, the unbridled joy on her face when they finally nailed a perfect take, and the profound kindness she showed to every single person in the studio, from the interns to the security guards. He had been drawn in by her secret voice, but he was now completely captivated by her beautiful soul. This wasn't about the producer and his protégé anymore. He was falling in love. The realization hit him one evening as he watched her through the control room glass. She was alone at the microphone, eyes closed, singing a love song she had just written. And in that moment, he knew the song was not just about some abstract feeling, but that, for him, it was about her. The powerful, guarded billionaire who had built walls around his heart felt them crumbling to dust. He was in love with Rachel Coleman, the fierce, gentle, resilient woman who had been an orphan just a few months ago. It was a terrifying and exhilarating feeling. This was the biggest plot twist of his life, a turn of destiny he had never seen coming. This complicated everything. Was it fair to her? Was he taking advantage of his position? His mind raced with doubts, but his heart was resolute. What he felt for her was more real than any business deal he had ever made. It was a love born from mutual respect, shared passion, and a profound admiration for her character. This was the ultimate love story, and it was his. Rachel, too, felt the shift. She saw the way Gregory looked at her with a tenderness that went far beyond that of a mentor. In his eyes, she saw not just a belief in her talent, but a deep affection for who she was. He made her feel safe, valued, and beautiful. The man who had every reason to be cynical and cruel had shown her nothing but gentleness and support. She was falling for him too, for the good man he was beneath the billionaire facade. The loneliness that had defined her entire life was finally beginning to recede. Their unspoken feelings poured into the music, giving it a depth and passion that was breathtaking. The album they were creating was no longer just a collection of songs. It was the soundtrack of their burgeoning love story. It was a testament to overcoming poverty, both of the wallet and of the soul. They were on the verge of completing a masterpiece, but before they could share it with the world, they would have to confront the powerful truth of what was happening between them. The Zenith Studios annual gala was the most exclusive event in the music industry, a glittering affair where deals were made and careers were born or broken. This year, however, there was a palpable buzz in the air. Gregory Woods, the reclusive billionaire producer, had promised a special announcement, a surprise offer to the industry. He walked onto the stage, the crowd falling into a hushed silence. Beside him stood Rachel Coleman, looking radiant and poised, a universe away from the shivering orphan on the street corner. For years, they've been searching for the future of music. Gregory began, his voice clear and strong. I thought it was a sound. I was wrong, it's a soul. He introduced Rachel not as a discovery, but as an inspiration. In the audience, faces like Marcus, thorns twisted with disbelief and envy. They saw the former cleaning girl, and they couldn't comprehend it. How could someone so insignificant be standing in the spotlight? They were about to find out just how wrong they were. Rachel stepped up to the microphone, a lone guitar in her hands. She didn't open with a loud, chart-friendly banger. Instead, she began to sing the song she had written in the studio, the one that told the story of her life. It was a heartaching ballad of overcoming poverty, of being humiliated but never broken, and of finding light through kindness. Her secret voice, now confident and clear, soared through the grand ballroom, and a spell fell over the apathetic, cynical crowd. The performance was a masterclass in emotional honesty. Every person in that room, from the most jaded executive to the most ambitious starlet, was captivated. They forgot who she was or where she came from, and were simply swept away by the raw, undeniable power of her story. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated talent that transcended gossip and status. When her final hopeful note faded, there was a beat of stunned silence, and then the room erupted. The applause was thunderous, a spontaneous, universal standing ovation. She had left them utterly speechless. As Rachel stood there, tears of joy streaming down her face, Gregory stepped back to the microphone. He looked not at the crowd, but directly at her, his heart wide open for all to see. "Her talent is undeniable," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But the greatest thing about her isn't her voice, it's her heart." Then came the final beautiful plot twist of the night. "I introduced her as my greatest artist, but I was wrong. She's the greatest love story of my life. I love you, Rachel Coleman." It was a moment of ultimate redemption. The billionaire had found his soul, the orphan had found her home, and their love was now as public as their music. The industry was left reeling, but for the two of them, nothing else mattered. They had faced down cynicism and cruelty, and had proven that the most powerful force in the world wasn't money or fame, but a kind heart and a true song. Their destiny was finally, beautifully intertwined. And so, we come to the end of this incredible journey. What started with a single lonely voice on a cold street corner became a symphony of love, redemption, and undeniable truth. The story of Rachel Coleman and Gregory Woods is a powerful reminder that the greatest treasures are often hidden in plain sight, and that a person's worth is never defined by their circumstances, but by the strength and kindness within their heart. Their heartaching love story shows us that destiny isn't something that just happens to you. It's something you answer to with courage and authenticity. We witnessed a cynical billionaire find his soul and an overlooked orphan find her power. We saw how a simple act of singing could be the most profound plot twist of all, leading to a surprise offer that was about more than just a contract. It was an offer of a new life. From being humiliated and invisible, Rachel rose to become a symbol of hope, proving that the purest art comes not from a place of privilege, but from a heart that has truly lived, struggled, and learned to sing through the pain. Now we want to hear from you. This story is filled with powerful, emotional moments, and we know that different parts will resonate with different people. What was the one moment in this story that truly touched you or left you speechless? Was it her quiet dignity when she was mocked, or perhaps Gregory's stunning public declaration of love? Let us know in the comments below what impacted you the most. What also loved or heart did you expect this ending? Or did you have a different outcome in mind? If this story of overcoming poverty and finding love in the most unexpected of places moved you, please give this video a like to show your support. And if you want to be a part of a community that celebrates stories like this, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss what we have coming next. We have a whole library of older videos for you to explore, each one with a story that will capture your imagination. Thank you for spending your time with us today, and we can't wait to see you in the next one.